So welcome everyone. So glad to have everybody on this beautiful afternoon. I am Lauren Pecorello. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Wellbeing and Development. And I am here to talk about CV, specifically around promotion to Associate Professor. And I want to give a special thank you to Doctors Catherine Chen and Dr. Rina Karani, who really created these slides, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to deliver them today. And I'm excited to harness their energy and share what I have to share. And just to give just a little bit of background on this event. So first of all, it's sponsored by the Office of Faculty Development, as well as with special help from OB and IME. But the focus today is obviously on promotion to associate professor from assistant professor, and it's largely focused around your CV. So we do also sessions in the fall focused on track and sort of criteria for those tracks. So that will not be a core goal of this session today. It will really be around preparing your CV and things sort of do's and don'ts for the CV. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So what we're going to be talking about today are, before the CV, we're going to talk about reviewers because that comes up a lot. So we will talk about that. But then we're going to talk about the CV template and criteria by track. We'll delineate the guidance for the CV narrative. And then we will have some time, about 20 to 25 minutes, to break up into small groups for a Q&A. All right, so the first thing is to determine your track. And I, again, am not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but I did put a tiny bit of detail on the slide so that you can get a sense of where you might be in terms of track. So for the clinical practice and administrative leadership track, these are generally full-time faculty positions and select other clinically oriented faculty. So for example, you might have a psychologist or a nurse practitioner who could apply for this kind of track. Who devote 90% or more of their professional activities to clinical practice, clinical teaching, clinical lab leadership, or leadership roles in clinical administration. Okay, so that's the clinical practice track. The research track. The research track are scientists who are key members of a research team who support the activities of multiple investigators or a shared research facility in the institution, or play a substantial institutional leadership role and are not expected to have direct independent research programs, right? So they are not getting R01s for themselves as PI, but they are often supporting PIs in various ways. Okay, clinical educator and or scientist educator. Now, it's a couple of years now, but this was formerly the clinician educator track. It is now this. And it was designed this way to really support both clinicians and scientists who focus largely in education. Right, so these are folks who demonstrate a scholarly approach to teaching and educational practice and contribute to the dissemination of knowledge in a clinical or scientific field, in health professions, or in the practice of biomedical education. Next is our investigator track. These are usually full-time faculty members with scholarly output that includes high-quality publications, acquisition of extramural funding, and evidence of innovation with broadening impact over time. And these folks can be MDs, PhDs, MD PhDs, Dr. PH, so some sort of doctorate level education, who is largely conducting research as their main work here at Mount Sinai. And then finally, we have our voluntary physicians. Now, this is quite a range of folks, physicians, clinicians, or scientists who are generally not employed by the institution, but may have privileges, or part-time employees may fall into this. And I would sort of encourage you to go onto the website if you're not sure where you belong, or to send a note to us at the end and we can try to help you. But these folks provide invaluable clinical, educational, administrative, and research contributions to the Icahn School of Medicine. Okay, so those are our tracks. That's all I'm going to talk about with respect to track today, but go ahead and take a look and see where you might fit. The next part is to understand the process. Now, I'm providing you with the process from the Department of Medicine, which may differ from your department. So I encourage you to go to your department leadership and ask them what the process is. It might be a little different than this, but all the same pieces in the end are really important. So in our department, Department of Medicine, we have to put together 3 of the 5 elements before sending to our divisional and then departmental level committees. Okay, so the CV, which is what we're going to talk about today, the chair statement, you have to have a draft of that, and the addendum if it's applicable. So the addendums are applicable for the clinical practice track and the clinical educator and or scientist educator tracks. So those tracks, you need to have your addendum ready. And you're going to provide that, in our case, to the divisional A&P committee, or it may go directly to your departmental A&P committee, okay? And that committee is going to decide, do we think you're ready for going on to the school level committee? So if they say yes, you need to pull together your referees or your letters of references nominator list, which I'll go over in just a minute, and your publication. So depending on which level you're going for going for associate professor, you typically need 3 publications. This might not apply to the clinical practice track, but for all the other tracks, you should have 3 publications that you can cite. And sometimes you'll just give an abstract, or just the citation is going to go into what is called the Sinai Central tracker. And I don't have a picture of that because it's a little complex, and I invite you to look at our APT video from last year, which has a sort of guidance on what the tracker looks like and what you need to do. But essentially, you need to input your reviewer list and your publications. It then goes to a committee within the APT committee, so a smaller group really vets and make sure that the rank and track are appropriate. And then if so, the reviewers are then contacted. So once all of the reviewers that are needed have sent in their reviews and your packet is complete, and keep in mind, if your packet is not complete, so for example, if during that vetting process, your CV is not in the right format, it's going to be sent back to you to be fixed. So that's a potential holdup. So it's really important that your CV is in the correct format and all of the things that we talked about today are correct. So then it goes to an A&P subcommittee, research versus clinical, and they make a review and recommendation to the larger committee. And then that committee hopefully approves it and sends it to the dean for final approval. So this is a general overview of the process. We can talk details in our small groups, but just so you know, this is all the things that have to happen. And sort of from soup to nuts, from beginning to end, this can take about a year, sometimes much quicker though. And if your letter writers, which tend to be the bottleneck, are quick about it, it can actually happen much sooner. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about reviewers. I'm going to try to get through this part quickly so we can get to the CV. So for the voluntary track, you only need 5 reviewers, and on the left-hand side are what they need to be. So geographically diverse, they should be experts in the field or knowledgeable about your field, and they have to be at least at the associate professor or the professor rank. They cannot be internal, they cannot be former mentors, and no more than 1 reviewer from the same external institution. And you're going to see patterns here. A lot of things are going to look the same. So for the research track, if you're not going for tenure, it's 6 reviewers. If you're going for tenure, it's 15. And again, very similar, geographically diverse, experts in the field, associate professor or professor rank. Again, not internal folks, not former mentors, and no more than 1 from the same institution, but 2 for tenure since you need a lot more reviewers. Okay, clinical practice and an admin track. Again, we're going to see the same things. Geographically diverse, recognized experts in the field, associate professor or professor rank, and again, not internal. So for this track, they couldn't have left the institution more than 4 years ago. So that's a potential person that you can still contact if you knew them way back when at Mount Sinai. And again, no more than 1 reviewer from the same institution. Okay, clinician educator and or scientist educator. You need 10 reviewers. If you're going for tenure, it's 15. And again, the same criteria on the left. The right-hand side, very similar to what we just talked about. They can't be anyone that you've collaborated with, i.e. published or shared a workshop or major presentation together. And then no more than 2 from the same institution. Finally, investigator track, you need 15 reviewers. Again, the same criteria on the left to include and excluding. Very similar, the top 2, no internal folks, no former mentors, and no folks that you've collaborated with during the past 3 years. And then no 2 reviewers from the same institution. So hopefully that's all clear. This is available on the website, and I'm going to ask Corinne or one of our other helpers to pop that into the chat at some point, because we have a very beautiful chart that was created by the APT committee that has all of this information. So we'll pop that into the chat at some point along the way. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the CV. So my first major point, and this is the most important point, and I will just like write it down, keep track of everything you do. Even if it's the smallest thing, someone asked you to do a favor and you sat on a committee for 3 months, or someone asked you to do a favor and give a talk to a bunch of, residents or fellows, and you think you're just helping them out, but it is a thing you've done that you've contributed, right? So anything that you do, keep track of. In that moment, just put it somewhere on your CV with the date and the title, and you can always come back and spruce it up later, but just put it down somewhere so that you don't forget that you did it. Every time you do something, every time someone asks you to do something and you do it, put it down. You want to be cautious about relating too much prehistory, right? So what does that mean? You want to include all post-training work, right? So when you started working as a job, and accomplishments, but only very important work from pre-training. So what do I mean by that? So you have to include your college and graduate training locations, degrees, dates, and major honors. So if you graduated summa cum laude, right, you want to make sure to include that. You want to include all publications, all peer-reviewed publications, even if you have them in college or medical school. But in terms of major accomplishments and awards, you want to include only really the major ones, right? The ones that are really stand out, not every little sort of, A+ you got in something, but it's really about the major awards. And if you have questions about what to include here, you can always ask a mentor specifically. All right. So other quick notes on formatting. So make sure you number each page of the document and use the same font throughout. So size 10 to 12. Usually something very benign like Arial or Times New Roman is good. Don't go crazy. Keep it very sort of traditional. And then 1-inch margins. Okay, also important. So when you're done with your CV, make sure you save it as a PDF, because you want to make sure you control the content and then it's getting moved around and no one else is adding or taking things away. All right, so now moving into the actual template, it's really, really important to conform to the template. The APT committee members on the call will attest that this is critical. They are looking for things where they're supposed to be. So if something is not where it's supposed to be, you may not get credit for it. And they're also looking for you to say, if you didn't do something, that's fine. You can say not applicable or none, right? So make sure that you don't leave any section blank, i.e. you're going to put not applicable under a section heading. You have to keep that heading. Also, list everything in chronological order. I'm thinking actually that might be my next slide. So I'm going to get to that in a second, but also make sure that you identify any gaps in employment and write a very brief explanation as to what was happening during that time. And CV track is the same for all tracks. So the actual CV is no different for any track. Okay, so chronological order from oldest to newest. Okay, that's very important. Anything that's happened in the past 5 years has to be listed as a month and a year, and I'm missing one of the Y's in that year. But anything more than 5 years ago can just be listed with the year. Okay, so just some other tips there. what I'm going to do here is try to show like what the actual template looks like, and then just some excerpts of my CV. So you can get a sense of what should be in what. Okay, so you can see here academic appointments. I'm pretty sure those are all more than 5 years ago. So those are in year format. And then you have hospital appointments, no gaps in employment. There's my education. Postdoctoral training goes under education. And then certification and licensure. Okay, so we did certification and licensure, then comes awards, patents, other entrepreneurial activities, and you'll see in a minute, there's a couple of things that I don't have, and then other professional roles. And I'm gonna talk very briefly about this because this can get confusing. So other professional roles are generally not leadership roles. It's generally membership roles. And it could be service, but it's not leading. And the reason is because there's another section that's administrative leadership appointments below that I'm going to talk about. And under that section, you're going to be a little bit more descriptive about what you did as a leader. Whereas in these professional roles, you're really just going to list them. They're not going to be as detailed. So here's some examples. So, and again, I don't have an example here of the patents and the entrepreneurial activities, but just imagine under my CV, those are both not applicable. Okay, so professional roles, the way I organized it just for my own brain is that I have extramural service and I organized it by national, regional, and reviewer activities. And then I have intramural service, so service within Mount Sinai. And for me, this helped me to keep things sort of chunked so I didn't get confused. So this is maybe a helpful way to do it. All right, so narrative profile sections come next, but stay tuned. We're going to talk about that at the end of this presentation. Okay, so then we have grants, contracts, and foundation support. Again, if you don't have any, it's just not applicable. But if you do, it should basically look like this. You're going to have past grants, current grants, and pending grants. And you're going to follow the grids and make sure you include all of the important information that is listed here. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but these are the items that you should include. And again, these are all listed on the template, which I'll have my team also drop into the chat at some point along the way. Clinical trials participation, very similar to the grants participation. Basically, make sure you include everything that is asked for here. Okay, trainees. This is important. This section is applicable only if you're solely or primarily responsible for a learner's education in a particular discipline. So what does that mean? If you are giving a talk to a bunch of medical students or a bunch of residents, and you're not having a personal contact and a relationship with any one of them in particular, then that would not go here. But if you are essentially mentoring a student or trainee through either a clinical scenario, maybe you are their single one-to-one teacher for a rotation, or maybe you are their mentor for an educational project, or maybe you are an advisor to them for their postgraduate or sort of life goals. Those things would basically fit in here. And again, if you have questions, you can always ask someone who's done this before, if you know what fits where. Okay, teaching activities, just as I mentioned before, this is when you are typically doing a teaching activity that occurs time and again. Although it certainly could be something that does one time, that sort of one-time thing will usually actually be listed under the invited presentations. This is more often a scenario in which you are giving a talk or a lecture or facilitating something that is something that happens more than once. Could also be if you are developing a curriculum, although there's also separate areas for that in the educational addendum. Okay, so now onto this administrative leadership appointment section. So this is really when you are leading something. You could be co-leading it, but it's really you are some kind of leader within a particular committee or program. You're an APD, you're, maybe you're a quality improvement leader. So those types of leadership appointments that someone gave you a title, or hopefully if you didn't get a title, you then asked for a title. And actually, it's a good time to mention that. If someone asks you to do something and it feels like more than just a one-off thing, like it feels like this is going to be something that I'm going to be, even if it's volunteer, I'm going to be doing some kind of work that's really important, whether it's QI, educational, ask for a title. It's really important to be able to name something and say, this is sort of what I'm doing under this thing, right? So even if it's, director or co-chair or something like that, co-lead, ask for a title. And so in this section, you're going to name your internal leadership. So could be research, clinical, education, or general administration, and any external leadership position. So let's say you are in charge of a committee as a part of your professional society, right? And you are the co-lead or the chair of that committee. That goes here, and you're going to list what you do for that committee. And I'll show you some very brief examples here. So you can see here, I have my internal things. That's research or clinical. These are pretty old things that I did. I have my educational things that I did a long time ago. And then you can also see here some external examples, right? So I was the chair of our organization's mental health interest group, right? So, and again, in this section, you're really actually putting in what you're doing, right? So you should be using your action verbs. What are you doing? And maybe an accomplishment of a committee or a group that you led. Okay, publications. So publications have a couple of different categories. You want to include your peer-reviewed publications first, and you can see that on this bottom section right here. Actually, the very first thing you're going to do is look yourself up in Google Scholar and look at what your H index is and what date you access that. And then under that peer-reviewed original contribution section, you're going to include any paper that you published that went through a peer review process and was published in a peer-reviewed journal. And in addition, you want to make sure of two other things. If you are in the middle author area, you want to just briefly mention what you did during the writing of that paper to contribute substantially to that paper. It could be a very brief, 1 or 2 lines. And then also anyone who's going up for associate professor or professor should mark any publication since last publication with an asterisk. Other publication headings include other peer-reviewed publications, which would be case report, opinions, letters, review articles, editorials, etc. Books and book chapters, separate heading, and then non-peer-reviewed publications. So those are the headings that you want to use for your publications. And then just remember to do your H index. And this is just an example of, someone who is here, a second author, and this is what they wrote. This is what they did for that article, and then they asterisked it. It doesn't have to be in red. Okay. All right, so coming to a close, these are the last 3 sections. So invited presentations are presentations that are parts of conferences, symposia, seminar, webinars, academic meetings, grand rounds, where you are asked. So this doesn't include poster presentations, but it would include if you were invited to give an oral presentation, or invited to give a symposium, or invited to moderate or be on a panel. So sort of a little bit of a differentiation there. And if you have a lot of these presentations, you might want to categorize them by national, regional, and local. You also want to include any media-based materials. And obviously, this is an area of growing interest and growing scholarship, potentially. So really think about, anything that you've produced that's out in the world that is medical related or related to your field. And then finally, the voluntary presentations, which will include those abstracts and poster presentations. And final example here. So this is just an example of how I categorized my presentations. So national, regional, and local. And then this is an example of media resource education materials. So, any web-based materials that you created, news and podcast appearances, written and news coverage, and then again, poster presentation. All right, so that was a lot. I'm going to take a quick breath. now I'm going to move into the narrative sections in the CV. There are 4 narrative sections, and 3 of them are 250 words, and then the overall impact is 500 words. Now, I will say that no one is going to, I don't think, check and make sure you're exactly at 250 words, but you want to be kind to the folks reviewing this, that these are long sections and you want to try to keep it as close to this word count as possible. So let me see. Here are some quick tips as per Dr. Karani. So stick to the word limits, which I just said. So external reviewers are going to see these, but not your chair letter. So this is really an opportunity to delve a little bit deeper into something that you may have mentioned in your CV and really talk about the impact and the outcome of that thing that's on your CV as a line. But why is it important? Why does it sort of tell the story of who you are? And why do you want to highlight this area specifically? So the research profile, for example, for a researcher, you're going to summarize your research accomplishments and their impact. For educators, you want to describe your area of scholarly work and any dissemination and impact. And for an educator, this might look different, right? It might be, well, a bunch of my colleagues really liked what I presented at a workshop, and 50 people reached out to me afterwards and wanted my information, right? That's not going to be in your CV, but this is an opportunity to share that impact of that work. Clinicians might describe work they're doing related to QI or practice enhancement, or how much their patients really like them, right? Like how do you know that you're a great clinician? Well, my patient reviews are amazing. And that actually will be part of your addendum, is patient reviews, but you can highlight it here specifically if let's say you're getting awards, about related to patient experience. You want to highlight that here. And then finally, administration. You want to make sure that you describe the impact of any kind of scholarly work that's related to your administrative role, right? And again, it may not be traditionally scholarly work. You may not have a ton of publications, but you may have presented at a conference, or maybe the committees that you run are, really achieving a lot of success and you're getting a lot of work done. You might want to actually just describe how much work and what kind of impact those meetings and committees are having on the institution. Okay, so the clinical profile, if you have no clinical work, you're going to put not applicable. Again, you're going to want to highlight the specific areas of clinical expertise and focus. And even the most generalist of us have these, right? I'm a general internist, but I can find areas in which I have focused and have specific interest in my patient care. And you want to have statements about your reach, right? So are you getting a lot of patient referrals? Do folks come to you for second opinions? Do folks come from distances? Do you get patients referring their friends? I mean, that could be enough for like a generalist, right? If you just get patients who are telling all their friends and family to come see you, that is a really important metric of how well respected you are. And then finally, the overall impact. You want to make sure, so this is really thinking about globally, and obviously you're going to tailor this to what your specific specialty is, and whether you're clinical or research, right? So it's really about sharing the overall significance of your work. And so you don't want to be redundant here. You want to be able to share additional information. And then think about how to describe the impact of your work. And remember, for associate professor, it's really moving into the regional space of impact and maybe moving into the national space. You don't need to worry so much about international impact when you're going to associate professor, although certainly if you have it, great. Okay, so the mentoring profile is geared at really this very specific thing, right? So mentoring. Why is this included here? It's largely included because it's a value of being a Mount Sinai faculty member, right? We value the ideal of mentoring so that our future generations of physicians and scientists will have mentors to guide them into their careers. So it's there because it's a value and we want people to be doing it. And so think about any activity that you've done that has shown mentorship as a value, right? It could be that you've hosted students in your practice, or that you have students in your research. And Stephanie, I see your hand. Just hold tight. We'll have a minute or two to ask questions as a large group in a second. And if you want to actually drop your question in the chat, I'll still call on you, but it'll give me a little sense of what's coming. You can also use this section to describe any ways in which you've enhanced your mentoring skills. So if you've taken our Mentoring for Mutual Success training, for example, or you've taken any other kind of course that you think has improved your mentoring skills, you can highlight it here. Okay, so here's an example of a mentoring statement, and I'll just read it so folks can follow along with me. As XYZ of the XYZ Residency Medical Education track, I provide educational and teaching mentorship to a wide network of trainees within the XYZ department, including X number of trainees. I've also been the faculty advisor to X number of residents who are accepted to and completed the XYZ program. I have also served as a mentor for educational scholarship projects completed by trainees that have been presented internally and externally. Finally, I provide ongoing career mentorship and guidance to chief residents in the XYZ department and to 6 XYZ residents per year. Sample 2. This is more of a bullet pointed way of doing it. So I've mentored over X trainees from the high school level through undergraduate, graduate, residents, and fellows, and providing them guidance in their research, clinical training, and career. I also participate in national mentoring programs. I oversee the advising of X number of XYZ degree students and monitor the career outcomes of our X number of graduates. Finally, I co-manage this Twitter account for aspiring physician scientists and started the club XYZ on Clubhouse, both of which involve inspiring physician scientists across the training continuum, offering application and career guidance to increase physician scientist inclusion, diversity, and resource access. I'm not going to go over this one because I've already gone over a bunch and we're getting tight on time, but this will be here. And also we'll be offering all the slides, sending out the slides as well as recording in a few days. Okay, so take home points. It's really an opportunity to share your involvement in detail and depth and commitment to the mission in critical areas. Don't just regurgitate what's in your CV, but really describe it, highlight the impact, consolidate efforts and activities, and share outcomes and impact, and describe how you are enhancing your knowledge and skills in these areas, as well as how you are enhancing the knowledge and skills for others. It's really an opportunity for you to learn and grow, and then think about, where this whole talk is really an opportunity to learn and grow, and think about where you might need to sort of enhance some of the areas of your CV. Okay, so that was a whirlwind. Let me see what's in the chat here. Okay. All right, so Stephanie, I know did you have a question that you feel like is valuable to the whole group, or do you want to wait until we're into our small groups? And I don't know if you're still there.
Hey, yeah, no, I just had a quick question about for the trainees section, current trainees, but also past trainees?
Yes, all trainees, any trainee that you've ever trained. Another good reason to keep track of all of that.
Thank you so much.
All right, so I am going to stop sharing. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to be sent into the rooms. Kai is my co-facilitator. She's going to be ready for the research and investigator group, and I will be moderating the clinician educator and or scientist educator and clinical administrative practice track group. So we are looking forward to seeing you all in those groups.
We are now starting the breakout room for the clinical practice and or administrative leadership and clinical educator or scientist educator tracks.
Folks in the room that are going to help guide us today. So Dr. Joanne Hosak and Dr. Meg Rosenblatt. If you guys want to give a quick introduction, I think it would be great just to share with folks what your titles are, what your roles are, so that folks know where you're coming from. So Meg, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Meg Rosenblatt. I'm the site chair of anesthesiology at Morningside and West, and I sit on the Appointments, Promotions, and Tenure Committee. And I just want to editorialize two things that Lauren said. Every one of you should have your CV on your desktop, and every time you blow past anything, just put a line in because you can always take it out. And it's those odd little things that you may not think of that make your CV look like nobody else's and make you special. And the other thing is, we really, when we look at your stuff, we want to promote you. We want you to do everything to help us help you. So those slides were fantastic, and we hope we can answer your questions and see all of your applications to a happy end in the next academic year.
Thank you, Joanne.
Hi, I'm Joanne Hoysack. I am a pediatric intensivist. I've also had many roles in the medical school, and I am a professor right now in pediatrics and in medical education. And I want to second what Meg said in that the organization is so important. And if it's nice and clean and we can read it and really tells a story about what you're doing as opposed to just a spewing of facts, or it really helps in trying to understand what your career goals are, where you are in achieving them, and it becomes a natural narrative to promotion.
Perfect. So I have a few general questions, and then I'm going to make sure I get to your specific questions too. So I'm going to offer the questions that came in ahead of time first. We only have a few, and then I'll take some from the audience. So the first question is, are promotions requirements specific to the department you are in or similar across departments?
We are looking for the same sort of things. I come from the Department of Anesthesiology on the East Side, which is an incredibly difficult department and has its own rules. It wants you at certain levels for certain numbers of years, and it's just always been very rigid. But I think now that we have more clinical responsibilities and maybe more people are switching to clinical from research, the department is looking to change, not to loosen, but to be more appreciative of other paths to promotion. So it may be changing. They're not all exactly the same, unless somebody knows something I don't know. Joanne?
So I'll speak from pediatrics, and I think that they're pretty much in sync with across the way. There are going to be little differences between in your different departments, which your department chair will inform you about. But overall, the grand scheme of things, the requirements for promotion are going to be the same.
Thank you. And one other question, sort of two in one. So are there any common mistakes that you see in the CV? And sort of as a follow-up to that, is there anything that either people feel like they should have spent more time on their application, or that you think people should have spent more time on?
If you can't brag about yourself, don't send us your application. You have to tell us why you're doing something different than anybody else. And if you're just sitting on a dozen committees, even if you're not leading the committee, under this time, your committee accomplished certain things, and this is what you were responsible for. Everything you can tell us helps us make the decisions that to help you through. And the other thing that I do, which makes me the most horrible person, is I actually ask my candidates to write their own letters for the chair to promote, because it helps me understand what they think are their strengths, and then we can go back and focus their statements and what they tell us in the CV to what they consider their strengths. I mean, the most important thing I ever learned was a million years ago, the chair on the East Side said to me, why are you different? Why are you different than everybody else? And how can I help you show this to everybody else? And that's the most important thing. I think the East Side was always afraid that you would have two people come up for the same rank at the same time and one would look better than the other, so they would hold people back and do all of that. It's not that anymore. It's why are you different than the other people that I'm putting there? So if you can write your own essay and you can, those impact statements are so important. You think they're just bull. What's your, your impact? Tell me why you're not just doing a job like a good clinician. Everybody brings something to the table. You have to figure out how to sell it.
Joanne, did you have anything to add on that question?
And I know Meg's going to agree with me on this one. Organization in the CV, if the CV doesn't follow the formatting that has been that Lauren shared with us so explicitly, it makes everybody crazy. It just you can't. It makes it that much harder to understand who the applicant is, and so the chronology has to be right. The citations for all your publications have to be right. H indexes have to be calculated correctly. We see all kinds of things. The essays really are important, and they don't have to be very long, but they really have to sell you. And then for each level of promotion, you really have to share in your CV not only that you are the best thing at Mount Sinai, okay, but that you are also acknowledged and recognized either on a regional area or a national area or international, but international what I'm talking about, but regional and or national level in some way. And so, for example, that you are providing workshops and teaching at different conferences, and people have sought you out to provide and teach those conferences, not only that you taught these classes at Mount Sinai and did them superbly. Okay, you have to take it out and you have to share it with other people. And that's the story that we're looking for.
We spend at least a half an hour to an hour on every one of these applications. So help us help you by putting things sort of in the right format and where they belong. And what else was I going to say about getting yourself? Did we discuss the addendum, Lauren?
We did not. I'm happy to shift to that. I do just want to make sure that we got everything in the chat. So I think Corinna's been doing a great job at answering questions in the chat. She's right on. We did sort of share some examples of what not to do in the CV. So basically, I think we can say it time and time again, follow the format, follow the chronological order. If it's less than 5 years, make sure it's month, year. Make sure that in your publications, citations are correct and that you're highlighting your own name so that people can see where you're at in that publication. In terms of examples of what I think we would have to have Seema here, because Seema and her team basically go through the CVs before they send it to the committee to make sure that they are correct. So she could probably give us a laundry list of things that people mess up. But I think if you go back to the template and follow it, you should be okay. So I do think it's important to talk about that addendum. So Meg, do you want to dive in?
I was going to go back to one more thing about
sure.
asking for letters of recommendation. If you guys are all going for associate professor, ask yes, it could be an associate professor or a full professor, but the full professors are writing full professor letters and you have a better chance of getting your letters back. Please make sure you speak to everybody who you request a letter of before. Nobody wants to open their mailbox and say, I don't want to. Joanne recommended that you write a letter for me. Joanne should have spoken to that person and they should feel comfortable writing for you. So you also have a better chance to get those letters back. As Lauren said, those are usually the limiting factors. So go where the money is. People that may not be writing tons and tons of letters and people that you know well enough that have agreed to it. Okay, now you can go. Sorry.
Well, no, I was going to just mention, sort of as a follow-up to the letter writing, you can send an email out to the people that you have on your list, and that email can simply say, I'm going up for promotion. You are an expert in your field. I admire your work. I was wondering if you would be so kind as to write me a strong letter of reference for my promotion to X. And you could give them more information if you want. You could give them the criteria for promotion. You could send them your CV ahead of time. The main thing that has to be made really clear is that they cannot send you their recommendation. They have to wait for an official letter from the Mount Sinai APT committee, follow those instructions, and send the letters to Mount Sinai. They cannot send it to you. But you definitely can ask them, and then you can use that, their response, to decide which people you're going to put on your list, right? Because you want people that enthusiastically say yes, to be on your list. So previous job colleagues, I believe it is yes, but I don't know if there's any time frame from which you have worked with them or not. Do you guys know? I don't think so, right? Yeah. So as long as you're not published with them or didn't do a workshop with them, if they were just a colleague, I think it's okay. All right, so let's talk about the addenda. Neha, just it doesn't have to be from the same specialty. It can be any specialty. It should be someone that fits with your work, right? So let's say you are an OB, let's say you're an anesthesiologist, but you do anesthesia for OB cases, right? So you could find folks in OB who could sort of speak to your work as long as they're in the same kind of space. If you're a medical educator and you're an associate program director of pediatrics, you might find an associate program director of medicine, right? But someone who does similar work to you. So it doesn't always have to be in the same specialty, but they have to have some connection to the work that you do. Does that sound right, guys?
If you're on a committee for a national organization, someone you've worked with on the committee that can vouch for you. Um, there's, yeah, there are a lot of ways to get letters. And I've often gotten blind letters from people. I don't know if we do them here, but people will send the CV, the packet, the whole thing, and ask for an assessment if this person would be promoted in your own institution. So there are ways to get other people if you're stuck.
All right.
I would recommend,
Yes, yes.
I would recommend to think creatively also. And yes, it can just be in your department or division, but I think it gives your package a little bit more of a breadth. If for example you teach a lot and then you have good medical teachers in other institutions that understand what you're teaching, and say, hey, this is really important, this is really good, this is really hard work, I've seen that person present at this conference, that kind of thing. So I think it adds a little bit more flavor to your application.
So will one of you guys begin to speak about the educational addendum? I'm going to try to pull it up so I could show what it looks like, but while you guys are chatting about it, I can do
Again,
that.
people do a lot of work that you just forget you get credit for. And the educational addendum was designed to sort of focus your thoughts where you might have missed something on a CV, to give you the opportunity to further describe what's going on. If you read applications for the medical school, tell us that you're in the top 5% of people that read applications. Or if you've developed an enhanced pathway for recovery for patient care in your division, it allows you really to, again, complement that. And it allows you to give a lot of data, which I'm not a primary care person, but if those of you that work in the ambulatory area, if you get data from Press Ganey that says everybody loves you or that you have the biggest panel in your department, it really allows you a place to, again, to continue to brag. And we don't consider bragging. It makes us so happy to learn what's going on in the other departments and that people are so productive. So it's sitting there asking more focused questions to give us breadth of your experience, especially if it's not with paper writing.
I also agree with that. And then, for example, when you give a talk or you're teaching in a course, there are evaluations that are done by the students or the residents. If you can find out all, and you can see that right there, right on the examples of evaluations out of a scale of 1 to 5 or whatever is used. putting down, that's you have some really good evaluations right there, stand out. Okay, so that you not only teach, but you teach well. And I think now that in the educator tracks, where yes, there is research still, and there is scholarship that goes in there, but you still want to show the quality of your education. So any evaluations you can find, they go right in there.
And again, this is one of those things that we like to see filled out because it looks like you are really trying to be promoted and being thorough. When we get these back and they look like, I hate to say, a piece of toilet paper, we're thinking that you're just throwing your hat in as a Hail Mary. We really want the information that lets us slide you through or push you up and over the goalpost.
So, and you'll notice that this was designed so it's not necessarily repetitive of what's on the CV. So the goal here is to show what you do above and beyond what's on the CV. You do not have to fill out every single one of these charts. That's not the idea. We don't expect that you've done all of these things, but they talk about, curriculum development, novel teaching methods. There's also a unique assessment with respect to teaching. There's partnerships, so maybe you formed a committee or something, related to improving teaching. So it's really trying to get everything related to teaching and education that you've done in one place, and not to be redundant. So hopefully that's the case. And again, you don't have to fill out everything, but you should, I think there's sort of the idea that you should fill out at least a couple of these charts to show, right? So the expected to have a scholarly approach and contribute to the dissemination of knowledge. So really, this should show that in some form. I also, while we're talking, I'm going to pull up the CPAL addendum as well.
Chris
Let's
has
see
a
what
comment
questions.
in the
Yes.
top, and Chris, whoever you, oh, I don't see you there, but that addendum is exactly what you're asking about in your question. He asks, how is the time spent working in education administration internal to Mount Sinai, clerkship directors, et cetera, weighted? It's not the time that you spent, it's the outcome of your activities. So in this addendum, it'll say revamped call schedule to ensure everybody has 3-day weekends, or, integrated a wellness curriculum that included A, B, C, and D in there. So it's not exactly the time, it's the effort and the outcome for the effort that we're looking at.
Yeah, and I'm just going to share the CPAL one just so folks can get a quick view of it. We won't be able to go through the entire thing, but this is really focused, obviously, on your practice, right? So we want to see how your practice has grown since you've worked at Mount Sinai. What are the specific focus areas? Where are you getting referrals from? So there's all this information that you want to include here. There's also an educational component. So if you don't feel like you have quite enough educational activities to fit in as a clinician educator, you can still include them here. And then there's the leadership. And I'm going to stop sharing because I think we're almost out of time. We have less than a minute left. Joanne, do you want to say anything?
I think with effort, everyone can get promoted. They just have to find which is their place and how to describe their activities in the best possible light. And again, I can't speak enough about the fact that you really shoot for some sort of regional, and you probably have it, but shoot for some sort of regional reputation, national reputation as you're moving up.
Yeah, and I think I'll add to that. First of all, upload all of the files that we put in the chat, but also for regional efforts, all you need to do is contact like a previous classmate or colleague and say, hey, I have a talk. I'd love to give it to your faculty, right? Just use your contacts or contacts that you may meet at local meetings. People are always looking for folks to give talks. So just, reach out to colleagues and find those opportunities.
We are now starting the breakout room for investigator and research tracks.
Hi, everyone. So I think given the number of people we have in the room, the easiest way to do this is if you have a question to put your hand up and I'll call on you and and have you ask your question. While you're thinking of your questions, I'm going to ask one question of the panelists from the pre-submitted questions, and then I'll look for hands. So the first question we're going to start with is, are the promotion requirements specific to the department that you're in, or are they similar across departments? And I assume this is within a particular track type. And what is required for promotion in addition to your CV? Although I think Lauren addressed that mostly, but if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Okay, I can go first, and then Prem, you can go if you want. So the requirements are not for the department; the requirements are for the school. So the committee does not. It knows what departments the candidate comes from, but we don't associate the candidate with the department, and the evaluation of the candidate is made outside their departmental expertise in some sense. And in terms of what is required, beside the CV, as Lauren mentioned, we need the letters from the reviewers as well as the letter from the chair of the department, and the matrix for the clinician or the scientist educator to evaluate them. Prem, anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered everything. I mean, the most important thing is this is not a departmental promotion. It's a school promotion. So there is no distinction from one department to the other.
Yeah. On a practical level, that means that if you have a friend in another department and they give you their CV from when they went up for promotion and give you advice, as long as they're on the same track as you, you can assume that your CV can be similarly formatted and that their advice is good.
I mean, also to note that, in fact, during the meeting, those faculty on the committee who belong to the department, the same department as the candidate, are excluded specifically from the discussion. So that there is no conflict of interest there.
That's great. Okay. I don't see any hands right now. So if no one puts their hand up with a question, I'm going to proceed with another question. But again, if you have a question at any time, please just use the raise hand feature. Okay, so the next question is, what are some common mistakes that you see with respect to people's CV? And what are some of the things that many people feel they should have spent more time on for their application? So I guess this is asking, when you, as a committee member, get the pack, where do you see the most problems and have to go back and say, this needs to be revised or this needs to be fixed?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Okay. So the most important things that you have to pay attention is your publication record and your grant support if you are especially on an investigator track. So even when you are in a research track, you certainly have to mention all the grants where you are a co-investigator or an associate in any role you are playing, and you are deriving a salary from that grant. So that is the most important thing. So publications, especially for research track, there are a lot of people who are middle authors. And it is very important, Lauren mentioned it, that you mention what was your role in this publication. I think a lot of people don't put that in, and sometimes when there are 20 authors in a paper, especially some genetics paper, it's very unclear whether these people were all put in because they are part of a study or you contributed very specifically to an important part of that paper. So, and some people think private foundation grants, small grants are not very important. I think you should mention every grant that you have or you have had before. And some people, don't mention at all pending grants. Pending grants are very important for a committee to know that whether if you have a small set of grants that you are attempting to get more funding for your research and you are in expansion mode. So people really look at pending grants very carefully.
And I would add that if you have a pending grant and, for example, you know what the score was on that grant, it helps us immensely to give that grant some weight. So if you know that your grant is pending, but it was scored, you are in this a fifth percentile, put it there because that gives us a very good idea of whether that grant is gonna get funded.
Yeah, and also even if it is 20th percentile, we know that your next attempt will be good.
All right, I see two hands just popped up. Talia, I think your hand was up first, so unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I just had a quick question about what is it that determines whether something is an R01 equivalent? Like, is that determined by the dollar amount? Is it determined by the granting institution? Like, does only NIH funding count? Is it like an R01 equivalent, or what are the determinants of that?
So generally, DoD grants are considered to be equivalent to R01s. So most government NSF grants, DoD grants, most government grants are considered to be equivalent. But at the same time, private foundation grants also count because things are changing rapidly at NIH. I don't know how many of us are going to have NIH grants, but all grants are given equal weight, and your track record becomes very important. You had a lot of past grants, and the chances are even if you have a smaller number of grants now, you are likely to get grants in the future. Certainly, I look at past grants and your track record of past grants when I'm reviewing a candidate.
And the same thing apply for the mentor grant, for the K awards. A mentoring grant, for example, with the AHA is almost equivalent to a mentoring grant with the NIH. So there are some mentoring grants. It's not just the amount, but it's also I would say the importance of the grant that is there and your role on that grant. So it's important if you are an MPI, even if you're not the contact PI, but you are an MPI, specify so because that is important. We know that you are an MPI in that grant.
Great. Emily, I see you have your hand up. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much. I was wondering if you could speak to the kind of what goes into making the decision about going up for promotion versus promotion and tenure, and why you might choose either of those paths.
Okay, so generally it is, when you're going from assistant professor to associate professor, the committee generally likes you first to go for promotion and 1 or 2 years later for tenure. It makes your path easier. So when you go both for promotion and tenure, the criteria become a lot tighter. So they're really going to look very carefully at your H index, for example, and whether you have any major accomplishments in terms of your publications. Have you published a paper in Cell, Nature, Science type of things become important for tenure criteria. And grant funding, past and present grant funding becomes also a very important criterion. So generally, most chairs put up for promotion first, 2 years later for tenure. Actually, there is a second advantage. If your chair wants to give you a raise in your salary, he has a second chance when you get a tenure. Otherwise, you get one lump sum raise in your salary.
And I think that when we look for tenure, we really look for that what we call the robust, sustained academic excellence. So really see that there is a very constant, right, funding there, so that the faculty has been funded and it continues to be funded and it will be funded in the future. So we want to see that trajectory of somebody who, especially at the associate professor level, and we're considering tenure at the associate professor level, we see somebody who's really stellar, has a stellar trajectory, has the potential to really continue to do that independent research. So one thing that is important is that you really look as an independent investigators. It's not just in your grants where you need to be a PI or an MPI, but also in your publications. So make sure that in your publication, you don't have your mentor always right next to your name. We need to see that you have left the nest, you are independent, you're able to do your own research, you are established as an investigator. It's important the associate professor that you have also a national leadership, that you are known nationally. If you are the full professor, we require that you are known internationally. So you need to have the footprint in the field where you are working on that makes you at that level that you are excellent there.
Great. All right, I'm going to take a question from the chat. If anyone else has a question that they prefer to put in the chat, feel free to do that or put your hand up. So this is about can you talk about the role of funding when you're on the research track? And then also, what if a candidate is qualified for promotion, but the PI lacks the funding to support the pay raise?
Well, for the research track, really, I mean, the definition of the faculty in the research track is different than the one in the investigator track, and is less important if you are in the research track that you have your independent funding. A faculty in the research track, it's somebody who is a very important part of a lab, of a team, who really is a collaborator and has a very strong academic record of collaboration and helping the lab to grow, to excel. So it's not that important to have the R01, but it's important to show through your being a co-investigator on grants and you are being a co-author on papers that you are really an integral and important part of that research team.
Yeah, another exception is people who who lead the shared resource facilities. So they don't have to have any grant support or collaborators, but they are performing a very important function. Somebody who runs flow cytometry, a transgene animal facility, these type of important facilities. People who direct or lead these facilities, we don't really look for grant funding.
Right.
It is the institution's responsibility to provide their salary support.
So just to be clear and emphasize, it's okay to have a section where you put not applicable and basically have nothing listed there. That's not viewed as a negative. It's viewed in the larger context of, should this section actually apply to you? And so in this case, funding is not so important for the research track. And so if you have it, it's great. But if you don't have it, it's not like you take off points for that, right?
Right, correct.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I don't see any more questions in the chat, and I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to ask some more of the pre-submitted questions. So one of the things we get a lot of is questions about how many of these different categories. So we have a question about how many publications and grants do I need for research track versus investigator? How many committees should I aim to serve on? And so I think this also sort of taps into this fear people have of putting not applicable, or I don't have anything to put that's in this category. So can you say something about sort of the minimum requirements? So let's assume a category is applicable. So whether you're on research or investigator track, you need at least publications. Can you say something about how you evaluate, how you consider number versus, say, quality?
Prime, you want to give it first?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of number of publications, certainly people look at the number of publications you have. But if you have, I have seen people with 4 Cell papers and a Nature paper, and with a very high index, H index, then you really, are not looking at number of publications. Very high quality, high impact papers are equivalent to large number of publications. But it's very rare that somebody has something like that at an associate professor level. I would say in an average is roughly 20 publications, both first author, last author, middle author papers together. And we have seen less with 10, but 10 outstanding papers. And we have seen more, 50 papers. And, quite often we see those things. But this is where your narrative statements become very important. You emphasize how your research has impacted, scientific community in general. So, and grant funding is always important, especially if you are in the academic track, investigator track. And on an average, people look for a minimum of 2 grants if you are going to as an associate professor, or one big grant and, couple of grants where you are a co-investigator with somebody else. So that's about the average that I'm looking at.
Yeah, and we look at, in general, is the whole packet that we look at. We don't, we don't focus on one thing or another. Is really looking at the candidate all around and see the contributions. The letters are very important because they tell us whether the people that evaluate you also think that you are worthwhile for a promotion. Often we find in the letters a statement like, we would promote this person in our institution. We would give tenure to this person in our institution. And that will give us a sense of, how important is your research, not just inside Mount Sinai, but also outside.
Great. We only have about 40 seconds left, which is probably not enough time for questions.
I would add that if you put your H index with your publications, that is also important because it really gives us the not just how many publications you have, but also how important they are, in what journals they are, and what impact they have. So the H index, it's something that is good to have in your CV.
Do you want to say something about what you consider sort of a good H index?
The higher the better. The higher the better. We don't have a minimum, but if you come with an H index of 2, obviously is not impressive.
All right. Well, I wanted to just come back together for a final regroup. Kai, was there anything that you wanted to share from your group that would stand out that you feel like would benefit our group?
No, nothing really sort of jumps out. I think it was very sort of track specific
Perfect.
questions.
I will share just some standout things from our group, which was that we talked about that it's okay to email letter writers in advance if you are looking for them and you want to make sure folks will write a strong letter. You can craft an email that is specific to that person, tell them you admire their work, and you're wondering if they would be able to write you a strong letter of reference for your promotion. That way, you actually ask people that are going to have the time and be able to do it, but they cannot give you their letter, right? The letter has to come directly to the Mount Sinai folks who will send it out. And we also talked about just making sure that CV is accurate, up to date, meets the criteria for the CV. It's very important, can't mention enough how often they receive CVs that are out of order or missing information. So just make sure that that is all done. And I know Dr. Sacker was hoping to share some words of wisdom. So if you take a look, he was kind enough to do that in his message just now. So make sure that you take a look at his notes.
I got it
So
into the chat. Thanks.
thank you. You got it in. So thank you everybody for joining us. We will share with you the video and slides usually within a week. And if you have questions moving forward that are more individual focused, you can always send them to the OFD email and we can direct them to the correct place to get the right answer for you. So good luck to you all on your promotions. Hope to see you coming through in the next year or two.
Thank you.
Have a great day.